would, in a very short note, I would be reflecting on the Egyptian efforts in the governance sector and how Egypt is moving forward towards better governance and enhancing governance. This is what I want, and this is what we need to have our own, to develop our own indicators, to have our own research, to build calibers that are able to talk about governance, to educate people on how to be transparent on everything. Academics are working for better governance and for sustainable development, and practitioners should be working in accordance with what academia is advising. I'm Dina, I come from Egypt. And actually, this presentation is part of my PhD dissertation on a broader scale country analysis. I've worked on 15 Arab countries, studying the causes of corruption in the MENA region. So I just picked 3 countries for this presentation. And actually, I know this might seem lame to talk about the causes of corruption, but as far as I was concerned, during the past 5 years, I've been working on studying the causes of corruption in those 15 countries. And actually, there are less empirical studies on the causes of corruption worldwide, and especially in our regions, African and Arab countries. So if you check all the literature on these countries, you would find just very general information and not empirical studies on this. So I've worked on the whole 15 countries in the region. For now, I'll be just highlighting main points in North Africa. I've been studying the relation between corruption as the dependent variable and different independent variables, including regime characteristics, economic statuses, and societal aspects and development. So these are the 10 hypotheses I had: rule of law, political rights, freedom of press, quality of regulations, economic freedom, natural resources. And then the 4 last ones were the most interesting for me personally, highlighting income inequality, poverty rates, literacy rates, and women empowerment. I've done this analysis during the period from 1999 till 2010, before the uprisings in the Arab region, to reach more strong findings and conclusions regarding the causes of corruption. I've relied on most of our international indices. I've conducted around 38 expert interviews with academics and high-level officials that are, of course, anonymous. I will not go through the findings one by one, but the most robust findings were the negative relationship between the rule of law and corruption. So the higher the rule of law, the higher respect for rule of law, the less corruption was witnessed. Press freedom is the same, and surprisingly enough, Tunisia, the main cause of corruption in Tunisia was the press freedom thing and the access for political participation, everything before the uprisings. Economic openness, meaning trade openness, proved to have a negative relationship as well with corruption. And the quality of regulations indicated more grand corruption among the cases under study. So it also emphasizes on the point which Professor Karim was talking about, the informal economy and the legal economy. And the natural resources endowments, it has a very interesting finding that because the countries which had more natural resources enjoyed higher GDP, this had shown on Transparency International less corruption levels. But this generally didn't indicate or reflect upon the real corruption levels. But still, it's a finding. On a general note, the Better Human Development Index, the countries showing the less levels of corruption. Income inequality showed very strong, proved to be have a very strong relationship with corruption, either grand or petty corruption, indicating either waste of resources, abused or wasted. Poverty rates, it was more obvious from the expert interviews. It encouraged more petty corruption to flourish among countries which witnessed higher poverty rates. Literacy. For me, this was the most interesting one, because theoretically speaking, the higher the literacy rates, the less corruption would be witnessed in a country. But actually, after the study and the analysis, it was proven that the quality of education is the main indicator. It's not the rates, the literacy rates, because by and large in the Arab region, around 90-something% are literate. But still, the quality of education was varying so much between the countries in the region. So, for example, Tunisia had very high quality of education, and this made petty corruption less in the country, in contrast to Egypt and Morocco, for example. Women empowerment, it indicated not only findings about women, but also the minorities in the countries under study. So if the women were not fully empowered, also the thing goes for indigenous groups or minorities in the country. I don't have to go through this, but Tunisia was doing very well compared to the other countries in North Africa. Still, the main causes of corruption were lack of political participation and press freedom during Ben Ali's regime, and also the quality of regulations led to shrinking of the middle class, which enhanced corruption more. And in Egypt, the most significant cause of corruption was the less respect for rule of law, vague regulations, and higher income inequality. Plus, adding to this, and from my own personal observation and also the expert interviews, the poor quality of education led to higher petty corruption, so that people were like, we accept bribes, we accept to pay bribes as well, because it's kind of, we complement the insufficient income we get by paying bribes or receiving bribes. And for Algeria, also the weak rule of law and still the unstable political environment and the control of government in political and economic terms enhanced corruption very, very well in Algeria, plus the natural resources endowments, which were mainly controlled by the government. By and large, the most important causes of corruption in North Africa are the weak rule of law, absence of clear regulations, inactive civil society actors, poverty and increasing income inequality, along with the lack of inefficient bureaucratic structures, unclear set of policies and procedures and monitoring, and so on and so forth. This was during the period until 2010. Actually, this was the main thing I was going to talk about, but then when I went through the program of the day, I thought it's good also to include what we're doing as an Egyptian government now to work on better enhancing transparency in the country and curbing corruption as well. So one thing on the Arab level is the Arab Convention for Fighting Corruption, and the good step that Egypt took recently is ratifying the African Convention on Fighting Corruption. I don't need to talk about Africa 2063 and the APRM, because some speakers would be tackling this topic, and the APRM, we talked about it a lot, but still, from an Arab speaker, the Arab Anti-Corruption and Integrity Network is working very well on developing the capacity of its member countries. It has 18 Arab states, 25 independent organizations from civil society actors, business, and academia. Egypt, Algeria, and Tunisia joined very early, and the network enhanced the capacities of countries like Yemen, Tunisia, Lebanon, Egypt to write strategies on corruption for these countries and build the capacities of government officials in order to enhance corruption fighting in these countries in a more participatory and experience sharing manner. As for Egypt and governance, now I'm back to Cairo very recently, a few months ago, and I'm being part of the government, so I'm still updated on things and steps that are taken in the government. So I've taken a look at the Egyptian National Strategy for Fighting Corruption, and it's now being updated to include a higher legislative role for fighting corruption, to produce bills for supporting protection and securing the whistleblowers and security of personal information, also updating some laws related to banks and illegal payments. Moreover, engaging the media is a very important part, so this is a step that has been the government is stressing so much on engaging the media in spreading awareness on the importance of governance and fighting corruption. And the last thing is the Sustainable Development Strategy, Egypt Vision 2030. There's a main pillar on transparency and efficiency of government institutions, and these are some of the steps that the government is undertaking in the current time. I'm working personally on the Code of Conduct for Civil Servants. It will be issued next year, early next year, and it includes a lot on being disciplined and getting over the ideas of illegal payments and all of this. So this is my presentation, but still I want to highlight some points that for me as a researcher and as an academic and now as a government official I need to highlight. This is the first time for me to speak in an African session, an African seminar, so it's a very good step for me personally, and I think for all the African participants, because I've been taking part in international conferences mainly, and it's always, we don't have this presence of African researchers. We don't have our own platform for research and sharing knowledge. It's mainly knowledge coming from Europeans or Americans, which I don't mind, but they don't know the context of corruption, of governance, on everything in our countries. So when I'm doing research on Arab countries, I know quite well the language, I know the culture, I know the pros and cons for doing this. But if somebody else is coming to do a research on our countries, it wouldn't be that efficient and reflective. So this was my own concern, and I was in Sweden in July, and I met some African peer scholars as well, and we shared the same concern, that we don't have our own platform for knowledge sharing, for research, for academia. So I would strongly encourage having this here, and I would be willing to take part on doing research in our continent. And I would also encourage the point that Professor Malouka has been talking about on governance, and Professor Campbell as well was talking about governance. I was thinking about this in the morning because we're not well aware on the governance concept. And having a common ground, a shared experience on what is governance as Africans, I think this should be the baseline for moving forward. Thank you so much. So I'm Dina. I do come from Egypt, and actually I spent the last 5 years going back and forth between Egypt and Germany because I've been studying there, doing my master's and PhD, and both are on the topic of corruption and governance, and my focus is on the Middle East and North Africa. So I have a lot of experience in this field academically, and then recently I came back to Cairo, and I'm teaching in the university, political science, and I'm also currently a consultant with the Ministry of Planning, Monitoring and Administrative Reform in the Governance Center. So it's the correct place for me to be. And the scope of our work is mainly consulting and doing research, conducting trainings in anything related to governance. So, for example, last week we had a meeting with the UN and the Ministry of Environment in Egypt for governance in environment and spreading awareness on climate change and everything. So it's very broad, still selective on the topics that are related to governance. It's part of my dissertation, my PhD dissertation. My PhD is about corruption, studying the causes of corruption in the MENA region. And for this event, I'm talking mainly about North African countries. And I also focused on Egypt, Tunisia, and Algeria because these are the members of the APRM. So yeah, it's mainly about the methodology and studying how to study the causes of corruption, because if you're able to study the causes, then you would be able to reflect on this and you would be able to figure out how to fight corruption. So this is mainly the thing, and I would, in a very short note, I would be reflecting on the Egyptian efforts in the governance sector and how Egypt is moving forward towards better governance and enhancing governance. To develop our own indicators, to have our own research, to build calibers that are able to talk about governance, to educate people on how to be transparent on everything. Because the concept is not new, but it's new for us in the continent. So it needs a lot of effort from everyone. From researchers, from academia mainly, from the media, decision makers and everything. I think the very basic step to be taken is to have like a think tank that's working on developing very good research on each and every country from its own experts, and then developing from those think tanks the policy-making processes. I think this is the very efficient and effective way of having better governance and developing the strategies of the APRM. I think their efforts should be combined. They shouldn't be working in completely different islands because both are complementing each other. Academics are working for better governance and for sustainable development, and practitioners should be working in accordance with what academia is advising. So I think it's more of a complementary effort for better development and sustaining this development. Yeah.